Ukraine is cutting off Crimea, while the FP5 Flamingo attacks are just the beginning. And Russian mill bloggers are practically panicking about what's yet to come, whether it's new Western cruise missiles or Ukrainian ballistic missiles. All this is happening while the fuel shortage is spreading from Crimea to Russia. All that in this report on the war in Ukraine. Holy cow, now save the most with my code at Holy. The fuel shortage is now spreading from Crimea to Russia. The Russian military blogger Z13 Spear reports here that the fuel shortage has now also spread to Krasnodar Krai, where the first 15 gas stations have stopped selling fuel. According to him, in Kuban the lines at gas stations are up to 100 vehicles long. However, of course, we have to assess this rationally to some extent. So we have a fuel shortage here. It's probably simply that these are people coming from Crimea, refueling outside of Crimea, since the supply to Crimea itself is difficult. Or people heading to Crimea who fill up extra so they'll have fuel once they're there. There are also pictures of vehicles where the entire cargo area is filled with canisters. All of this is likely playing a role here and is one of the consequences of the attacks. At the same time, however, the Russian military blogger Maxim Kalashnikov says the enemy's intention is clear: to trigger a fuel panic in the Russian Federation and to create a fuel supply crisis. This undermines, in one stroke, the economy of the new regions of the Russian Federation, including Crimea, that is, the annexed territories, and extends to the fertile south of the Russian Federation with its black soil. The supply of the army is undermined, agricultural work is disrupted, the grain harvest decreases, and the economic crisis worsens. For this purpose, the enemy attacks tanker trucks on the roads, sets oil depots on fire, and cripples refineries. Because our air defense is weak, and there aren't enough of them at the refineries. And if Ukraine receives ballistic missiles, oil refineries will certainly become priority targets for them. In short, the enemy has identified a weak spot and is striking there, which is worsening the fuel crisis. In doing so, the Russian leadership is showing a rare inertia. They are being led to defeat, deprived of their huge profits, and Concha Zaspa remains untouchable, and the ports on the Black Sea are not blocked by minefields. An arrangement, they say, that is more reminiscent of the relationship between a sadistic dominant and a masochistic cockholt, and the Russian upper class does not play the role of the former. So that's a really harsh criticism from Maxim Kalashnikov, who, by the way, is on trial for discrediting the Russian armed forces. We move on to the FP5 attack on the Vern Veneer Progress Plant in Cherboksy in Chuvashia. Navigation devices for Russia's precision weapons are manufactured there. And now we have a video from the facility on site, where damage is clearly visible. We can see it here in these spots. They're still putting out the fire here. So, severe damage to the building, which was practically gutted by this attack. The Russian military blogger Military Informant says that, just like in the last attack, at least one missile hit the plant. But this time, neither luck nor the lack of accuracy of the Flamingo helped. The missile did not hit in front of the building as before, but directly in the roof and caused severe damage. It should be noted that after the last attack, which also included an attack with Antonov-type kamikaze drones, 1996 Ludi, the company took serious measures for drone protection. Nets were stretched between the towers. But of course, that can't do anything against a missile weighing several tons. We can see in the picture here that there are towers where heavy metal nets have been stretched between them, specifically to stop drones or to make them detonate in front of the building itself. But as you said, the Flamingo weighs several tons, comes close to the speed of sound, and the warhead alone weighs a ton, so it goes right through such a net like it's nothing. Even the Russian mill blogger fighter bomber can't hide his frustration. It's much easier to detect on radar devices and radar targets than, for example, the Luti and other UAVs. So here we can see the FP5. With timely detection and target acquisition, it can be easily tracked and engaged with manpads. Those are shoulder-fired missiles. It can also be shot down by all types and kinds of combat aircraft. Probably only helicopters and anti-aircraft guns are not very effective against it. All other means have been capable of shooting down such targets for more than 50 years. Because the Flamingo is very large, it does fly relatively fast, but it doesn't have any special stealth capabilities. Basically, it's a large aircraft flying there, and as such, it's relatively easy to engage. Moving on, fighter bomber. It's hard to say exactly what the reasons are for why they get through. These missiles are fired individually. Therefore, this isn't a case of air defenses being oversaturated. There could be two reasons. Either they messed up, or there were no air defense systems where it was flying. Of course, the fact that Ukraine has now destroyed more than one air defense system per day is probably related to this as well. And as often said, every air defense system that is destroyed faster than the Russians can put new ones into service weakens the overall Russian air defense and demands either concentrating and thereby creating gaps where air defense systems are then missing elsewhere, or it simply means that in general, the air defense becomes weaker. And the Ukrainian armed forces say that in the first 5 months, they destroyed on average more than one air defense system per day. Cyber which is a Ukrainian open source account by the way, reconstructed the flight path based on reports. And here we can see how the FP5s fly into Russia. And that's the target. And these are the sightings that were made each time. If we look at the whole thing, I'll speed it up again. If we look at the whole thing, the flight path, we see that it's by no means heading directly toward the target, but most likely the FP5 initially passed the target, to then attack it from behind. And there we see how well the topography was used. Possibly hills, river valleys, or something similar, and how the mission planning was done to bypass enemy air defenses, so that you can get through with the appropriate cruise missiles. And of course, that's much easier if gaps have been torn into the air defenses. Maxim Kalashnikov is frustrated about this. Russia has major gaps in its air defense, that's a fact. Relatively simple aircraft, small jet planes, like the FP5, which are effectively small jet planes, clearly flew from the territory of Ukraine and spent at least an hour and 15 minutes in the air. They do not have a low-altitude flight mode that allows them to follow the terrain. Nevertheless, they were neither spotted nor intercepted by fighter jets or shot down with the help of anti-aircraft missile systems. That means, without radar systems in the air defense of the Russian Federation is unsustainable. In the event of an attack by the USA, and this is really the crucial point now, he says, basically, we have no chance against NATO in the event of an attack by the USA or NATO. Countries that can send hundreds or thousands of cruise missiles like Tomahawk, Storm Shadow, and JASM in an air attack. We will not be able to repel this and will suffer enormous damage, just like Iraq in 1901 or Yugoslavia in 1999. Now there is a huge threat to our oil refineries and oil terminals. The payload of the Flamingo is more than a ton, similar to the V2. That is equivalent to an attack on a single point with at least a dozen Lurti-type drones. With the appearance of the FP7 ballistic missile in Kiev, the threat becomes even greater. Even the Russian mill blogger and engineer says it's just beginning. By late autumn, at least 2 Western UAVs roughly the size of small missiles are expected. These are the Ruta and Barracuda models from Germany and the USA. If you compare the size of the warheads, they are functional equivalents of our Garan drones. This is the Shahed, which is built by the Russians, but was designed from the beginning for mass production, with lower requirements for storability and reliability. By making maximum use of components from commercial cooperation and applying mass production almost like on an assembly line. This ensures an expected price at a level comparable to the Garan drone, but with significantly better operational qualities and a high speed of up to 600 to 800 km/h. This means that the short-range air defense system in use against a jet UAV is, by default, inferior. Interceptor aircraft, artillery guns, MOGs, that is, mobile response groups with machine guns, and helicopter interceptors will have no effectiveness whatsoever, nor will passive protective measures such as nets. Air-to-ground missiles make this possible. Excuse me. Air-to-ground launches and folding wings make it possible to carry up to 8 UAVs under the wing of fighter jets. This makes it possible for a few dozen aircraft of the Ukrainian armed forces to fire about 150 missiles in a single salvo. This makes the direction of the attack completely unpredictable until the last moment and prevents any preemptive countermeasures before launch. In combination with the usual slow UAVs, they enhance the effect of drone spam and overload the air defense, reducing the interception rate per salvo, which makes it possible to quadruple the number of targets hit. In addition, the preparation for the production of European ballistic missiles, led by a Ukrainian company, will result in an annual production of 500 to 700 units in about a year. This would allow them to fire up to 20 to 30 ballistic missiles in a single salvo a few times a month. Defending against such an attack is a much more difficult task than even intercepting jet UAVs. Sasha Coates also talks about this. Such attacks will become more and more frequent. The British are supplying Ukraine with missile components for final assembly. The enemy is stockpiling them and will use them together with long-range drones. While the latter keep the air defenses busy, the former will try to break through to the target under their cover. Apparently, Kyiv has received the green light to use any weapons against any targets on Russian territory. It must be made clear that there are no rear areas anymore. The stated range of the Flamingo is 3,000 kilometers. Theoretically, they can even reach as far as Siberia. And a 1,000-kilogram warhead is enough to cause serious damage. Yes, at first the enemy had problems with the combat deployment of the FP5. The missiles veered off course and dropped during launch. But the Ukrainians, together with Western advisors, are gradually getting them up to speed. In the future, intercepting them will become a non-trivial task. Getting enough vitamins and minerals, on the other hand, is a trivial task. Thanks to today's sponsor. I have to travel to Europe soon for work, and the flights are the only nightmare. The shortest flight times are 21 hours or even longer. It can easily go up to 28 hours. And that's not even counting the travel to and from the airport, or the time you spend waiting before departure. The whole thing is an absolute nightmare. Not just because of the travel time, but also for health reasons, it's a massive strain. After something like that, I usually end up with a bad cold because it's so exhausting for me. At least I try to do my best in preparation when I take such a trip. I have to make sure that, when it comes to vitamins, minerals, and so on, I'm as well prepared as possible. And today's sponsor, AG1, helps me with that. AG1 replaces up to 15 basic supplements such as vitamin C, A, B12 calcium, magnesium, zinc, and much more. AG1 has been continuously developed for 16 years. Its effectiveness is supported by 4 clinical studies. That is absolutely exceptional in the supplement industry. It is also certified by the Cologne List and Informed Sport. This month, there is a €20 discount on the first order. Plus, you get 5 AG1 travel packs for on the go, which are really ideal for trips like this. You also get a bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2 and the welcome kit. And you can try all of this at www.drinkag1.com/mgeschichte. The subscription can be cancelled or paused at any time. There is no minimum term, and you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. That means, if you want to try out whether AG1 helps you move forward and make sure you're well taken care of, even during tough times, you can try it completely risk-free. Drinkag1.com. Mgeschichte. Meanwhile, Ukraine is systematically working to isolate Crimea and the land bridge from Russian supply lines. A targeted attack was carried out on the infrastructure of the port in Mariupol to hinder its loading capabilities. This, of course, makes it more difficult to supply the entire land bridge across the south by sea, especially if Berdyansk and other ports are hit afterwards, where attacks on ships have already taken place. At the same time, after attacks on the bridges of Hinichesk and Chonha, the bridge over the Crimean Canal and other bridges have now also been attacked. 2 majors say that, from a military standpoint, the Ukrainians are acting logically. I have appropriately changed the word used by the Russians, just as a note here. So this is not an absolutely literal quote. Alexander Parker Returns says about this, that effectively, Crimea is now an island. Here too, it's fitting. And Brofty, the commander of the unmanned forces, is already announcing a complete blockade of Crimea. The Russian blogger Military Informant reports that Ukraine is now also using drones to attack parking lots for trucks. In fact, the FP2 drones are currently something of a necessity for Ukraine, a second HIMARS, since they can perform the same tasks that the HIMARS systems accomplished in the summer of 2022, namely, cutting off Russian logistics in Kherson by attacking the ferry connections from the mainland. Now it's Crimea that plays the role Kherson once did. If the attacks continue systematically, the peninsula's transportation links through the new territories will be seriously affected, and they will be forced to open the Crimean bridge for trucks, with the risk of losing that as well. Because the Crimean bridge is not currently accessible. Exactly. Because on the one hand, a heavy bomb was once transported there on board a truck, and on the other hand, no fuel is being transported over it anymore. Because this severely damaged the railway bridge when fuel wagons leaked and caught fire during this attack. And of course, that heavily damaged the bridge. The two majors join this long line of bloggers who talk about the current situation and argue that for years, attacks have been carried out against the same targets without achieving anything decisive. That needs to change. We have to clearly say right now, it's not clear how much influence the Russian bloggers have, but Ukraine should really start expecting attacks on the Dnipro bridges. In recent years, Russia has refrained from hindering its own advance. In Kherson, you could see that the crossing of the Dnipro was possible for the Russian troops during the attack because the bridges were intact. Currently, however, it is unrealistic that the bridges over the Dnipro are in other places. So if we look at the map, the Dnipro runs along here, and there are bridges over the river at various points here. And the idea that these could be reached by the Russians in the foreseeable future, and that they could then use them to cross the Dnipro, is currently completely unrealistic. Therefore, the destruction would put Ukraine under massive pressure, because all the supplies for this area here, which we are cutting off like this, everything east of it, so all of this area, has to cross the Dnipro. Everywhere, everything that is used there, but also the civilian population living there, the millions of people who live there, all have to be supplied across the Dnipro, and can only be supplied across the Dnipro. Attacks on the bridges there could trigger a real crisis for Ukraine if they are destroyed. A lot of Ukraine's railway logistics also runs across the Dnipro. Especially the Ukrainians use the railway a lot for the military, of course. Keeping the Dnipro crossing open with temporary bridges and ferries would already be very challenging for Ukrainians with trucks, but it's even harder for railways. Since the landing point can be predicted, it would be easy to attack. So while the Ukrainians are currently putting massive pressure on the south, increasingly threatening Crimea and cutting off logistics, the Russians now have to consider whether to put the bridge back into operation for trucks, which in turn could make the bridge a target. Especially, of course, because controls can't be carried out to the same extent when nothing is running in the north, and all traffic has to go over the bridges here, while the ferries are also damaged. So that's the situation in the south. And while the Russian bloggers and the Russian engineer are talking about how the attacks in the hinterland are just really starting and will get much worse, it's by no means the case that, when it comes to attacks in the hinterland, the Ukrainians have this all sewn up. On the contrary, attacks on the Dnipro bridges could still become a huge problem for them. That's it for today's situation report. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment if you have something to add, and if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. That's all from my side for now. Thank you very much for your attention and see you soon. Many thanks also to the supporters on YouTube as well as here on Patreon. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamori and to Lieutenants Finn, Fünfab, Flecktan, Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Freien, Nickname Frieden, Nickname Tubib, Carsten Schulz, Tequila, Tequila 42 Immelkopf, Pate, Floja, Capri, Bertenmint, Lichtshatter, NTX, Malermeister, Nagel, Markus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Rosenthal, Matt Best, Sigrider, Möter, Janis Gu, Sascha Müller, Cunningham, euch Stress. Thank you very much. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.